the second panel discussion of this Social Innovation Forum. We will be exploring a little bit more the current landscape of social innovation within the various communities of practice. We have a distinguished panel of experts again, and I would like to invite them to the stage. Armelle Ledan. Armelle, please take a seat. Maybe, I don't know which seat you want to take, but the lead thematic expert, Armelle, is of the COP on social innovation. She's coordinating or contributing to several EU projects in that field, such as Social Innovation Community or Safe Habitus. And she's also the author of the Practical Guide on Social Experimentation for Promoters. She also coordinated several ESF transnational cooperation networks in the past. Luc Zelderlo, we saw Luc yesterday also in the panel, the lead thematic expert of the COP on social innovation, and I'll gladly repeat that he was the Secretary General, actually, of the EU Network of Services for Persons with Disabilities, and he's today the President of EMINO, which is a supported employment agency for persons with disabilities in Flanders. Then Angela Frigo. Angela, welcome. Angela is the thematic expert of the COP on material support. She currently works as a Secretary General at the European Food Banks Federation, FEBA, and Angela's duties include managing the organization, promoting the core mission and the values of FEBA, and providing a central point of contact for all stakeholders. Also very welcome this morning. Agata Charle. Agata is the lead thematic expert of the COP on employment. She's a labor economist, senior researcher, and executive partner at the Budapest Institute for Policy Analysis. She has over 20 years of experience in research and public administration in employment and social policy, and has led several projects commissioned by DG Employment of the European Commission, Eurofound, and the ILO and UNICEF. A lot of experience there. Erika Borg is the thematic expert of the COP on migrant integration, colleague of Nadia, who we saw here yesterday. She graduated with a master's in human rights and democratization and a master's in gender, society and culture, and has been working in the field of human rights for over a decade now with a specific focus on migration and integration. She's worked with the EUD in Turkey, international NGOs, local NGOs, and the government of Malta, where she's based. And then, Miguel, may I invite you also to take part in the discussion. I trust you have a lot more input to share with us. So yesterday we talked about the holistic approach, remember, and how we can work together. Today we want to delve a little bit deeper into the innovation of each of the themes, each of the communities of practice. And the first question is then, by the way, you're also going to be asked to raise questions via Slido and by voice. But what is the current trend and development in the social innovation in your thematic area or your community of practice? And then I would look at Armelle first. Please, how does the COP social innovation look at this? What are for you the main trends?
Good question. As many of us, I started also some time ago to work on social innovation. And at some stage, it was really on the top of the EU agenda, and everywhere, everybody was talking about social innovation. It was the really fashionable buzz and everything, which was sometimes counterproductive. The result of that is that we have a wealth of social innovation initiatives, projects everywhere, some which are amazing anecdotes, as it was said before. And that leads to the problem of scalability and the lack of achievement of what we were aiming at, which is we have societal challenges. We said that, very complex. Concretely speaking, we're talking about people. We're talking about people affected by poverty, unemployment, discrimination, etc., etc. The scale of the problem is not decreasing. And we are only making solutions for a small proportion of them. And the big problem is how to provide solutions at the level of at the scale of the problem. If you have thousands of migrants, it's great that you can make the lives of 100 of them much better, but what about the others? Same for homeless people. Same for all these people who are suffering from the society we live in at the moment. So there's the trend now that we notice in the COP and that we try to support, and that the EU is also trying to support, is instead of, or in addition to supporting these initiatives everywhere, also to try to reinforce the whole ecosystem. I don't like these big words, but what we mean by ecosystem is to reinforce the skills, the competencies of all the actors, to connect them together, to better use the tools and the method that we all produced and that are isolated, to get the right funding.
How do you see this trend coming into practice then?
For instance, in the COP where we are, two things which are quite obvious is that, as you heard, in each member state now there's a national competence center for social innovation, which is on its way with different levels of development. So that's one big key new stakeholder. And the fact that that's a novelty, in all the ESF Plus programs, we're in an ESF event today, the new regulation imposes to have a social innovation priority in each member state, at least one. And we reviewed that and we presented the results yesterday. From 11 programs in the past period, we now have 40. The amount of money is also much bigger. Money doesn't make everything, it's not the solution, but at least the resources, some resources are there, and there's some willingness from member states at different level with different intensity, but everybody now is committed to support social innovation in various ways. So to me, that's a step further.
Yes. Luc, do you recognize that this is a step forward? And can you also maybe share what the trends are that you see in your COP of social inclusion?
Yeah, yeah. Of course, I fully agree with what was said by Armel. The COP on social inclusion works on homelessness, child poverty, and community living of persons with support needs, persons with a disability. And long-term care is a sort of a side area we try to include as well. And on these three areas, we see very important scene-setting, innovative thoughts that become more and more, at least in the thinking. That's the first step, maybe, in the thinking mainstream. We see, for instance, that there is now a growing consensus, and we discussed that yesterday, that housing first is a very important approach when you want to combat homelessness. Having a house, a home, stability in your life is absolutely essential if you want to go into employment and so on. In the homelessness area. When we look at child poverty, we see now, and that is prevention, we see now that there is a growing consensus that early childhood intervention, as soon as you see the first signals, intervene. Support the family, empower parents, empower the environment around the child is so important. So early childhood intervention. And in the third field, community living of persons with disabilities and with support needs, we see, and that is quite often financed through ESF and ESF Plus funding projects, activities, we see that direct payments don't provide the funding to the social institution or the service provider, but provide the funding to the individual, to the family, so that they can manage the system around them.
Which supports the whole person-centered approach we talked about yesterday.
Exactly. Then you have a sort of an holistic approach immediately in your approach. So direct payments are developing now very fast. What we also see, and that is something we will have to deal with in the social care sector, is across the European continent, we see staff shortages. In the care sector, it is so difficult to convince young people to start a career in the sector. And as a sort of an answer. It will not solve all the problems, but I see that digitalization is developing very fast, and we see some very interesting things there. I can give you one example. In support of people in independent living, we see now that some organizations, support providers, set up digital support platforms, sort of WhatsApp groups or Face groups, where people themselves do peer support, coached by professionals online. And it works. It really works. It empowers people, and it gives them a sort of a control over their own life.
And in which environment do you see that?
We do that in Flanders in employment, for instance.
Okay.
Difficult to find your way into a job. Okay, we set up a peer group, people that with a disability, with support needs, with, as we say in the Euro jargon, some distance from the labor market, while it is not they that have a distance from the labor market, but the labor market that has a distance from them. We should not blame people for being unemployed, I think. So what do? We set up groups, and coached by well-trained professionals. You need very well-trained professionals. People support each other on how do you write an application? How do you go into an interview? What type of skills do you need to go into that or that type of job? Online, they support each other, they empower each other, they encourage each other, they celebrate success together, and it works. And that's a new type of working that is developing and tested in some countries through ESF funding.
Agota, Luc just talked about digitalization. I think that was also for you in your COP a very important trend that you wanted to highlight, right?
Yes, exactly. So digitalization is an obviously growing trend in employment services, and the advantages are obvious, and it's all been highlighted by the COVID, the crisis, the pandemic, which pushed all organizations towards digital channels. But what I would like to highlight now is actually the risks of digitalization, which I think applies to all services, which is the Matthew effect, so the issue that it's often the most vulnerable who are left out of the new opportunities created by innovative solutions. Which we would probably, or perhaps in all countries we saw in rural areas where people didn't have access to digital channels and were left out of the new services or the new platforms created to tackle the pandemic. And perhaps we haven't, so far we haven't focused on this topic in our COP, but we've already found a number of good examples of how to deal with the risk of excluding the most vulnerable. And the example I would like to bring in now is that of an Irish NGO, NALA, who's working in adult training and education. And when they introduced new channels and started using digital channels for outreach, they also realized that they have to keep some of the old channels, and they actually used community radio channels, which is also very cheap. So often we think that keeping the old channels is expensive because it requires personal services and face-to-face meetings, which is indeed expensive. But in their case, they found a very cheap solution, and it worked for keeping their traditional clientele who's not using digital channels at all.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Erika, may I turn to you? What do you see as the trends, or are there speaking points that you recognize maybe from the other panel members in the COP of migrant integration?
Definitely there are common factors. I mean, migrant integration does not work on its own.
That's
so
what we understood
they're all feeding
yesterday.
in, so this for sure. I think I'd like to start with my understanding of social innovation, or what I align with more. And I think it's about changing social relations, right? By tackling power mechanisms and imbalances. I think that is an important factor to keep in mind, to meet social needs, and in the end to empower vulnerable groups. And I think the word empower is important also. I think in emergency cases, we can go with the concept of assisting, but I don't think that should be a long-term plan to just assist. So just to clarify this understanding. And in line with that, in terms of integration, focusing more on like integration governance, since a lot of the other issues are tackled in the other COPs. What we are seeing now is that there is more engagement in a kind of parted engagement of policymakers, stakeholders, including, and obviously a very big part is also civil society, and the target group, well, in this case it would be migrants. And I think it's important that they all come together at par, so not just invited for one meeting, just to put in one comment here and there, but at par, always at the same level, to then create policies that work for everyone. And this we are seeing a bit more within member states, including, for example, there are guidelines on integration strategies and to check how inclusive they are, which would be also to see the involvement of migrants within the building, so the drafting of that strategy, and then obviously the implementing of it. So I think this is a positive trend that we are starting to see, still in development stages, but we're starting to see it. Of course, digitalization is another one, but at the same time, it's another factor, in fact, which you have to make sure it does not leave anyone out. So you always need to find this balance.
Huh? Which is very difficult.
It's a matter of thinking about it. It's not too difficult.
Okay.
I think it's just a matter of being open to offering the right services for everyone.
Okay. Finally, Angela, from the COP of Material Support, what are your thoughts on the big trends?
Yes, so thank you. I start saying that, well, material support, and in our COP, it means providing food and basic products to the most deprived, to the most vulnerable groups. If you want, it's not something new, because, I mean, the fact that you are giving food to those who are in need is a kind of old activity. And it's not only old, but it's also kind of, if you want, natural activity. If you think, I mean, of a mother, the most simple but also natural act that she can do for her child is to give food. So it's something, when we speak about material support and especially providing food or other products to those in need, it's something old, I would say, but at the same time also natural. So how what can we see, how can we innovate this kind of old activity? And I think that it's possible to innovate it. It's the way we do it, and I think that if we want to innovate is how we do this activity, learning from the past, from previous experiences, learning from each other's, and I think that our COP, but the COPs are the perfect place where we can learn from each other, and we can also, and starting as our colleague said before, from the needs. So it should be driven from past experiences, from learnings, but also starting from the needs.
Yes, yes.
And some trends that we see in our COP, and I will mention just one. So as I said, so material support is something, let's say, kind of old activity, providing food, but we see an innovation. So if we think in terms of the FAIRD or now the ESF+, we have seen an evolution in terms of the quantity and quality of food and products that are provided, and also the fact that these are more in line with the needs, also with the external circumstances. And there's also now a shift from a physical and concrete material support with food and basic products to also kind of more virtual support using vouchers to purchase food and other. So I really believe that there's a lot of innovation, not only because we have to invent something new or do something new, but we can do in a different way what we have always done.
Yesterday we talked about how we can learn more from failed cases. May I draw a parallel here? And could you also say that in social innovation, we sometimes maybe focus too much on the real novelties and don't pay enough attention to what's already there and build on that? Mikel, what do you think?
That's how a lot of the innovations actually happen. So absolutely yes. And reacting to some of the comments, I think this approach on prevention is there. The problem is that we do not use prevention in a systemic way. So because we don't measure the right things. So when we are trying to prevent trying to work around children in care. I guess every single country works on children in care, right? And we all know early childhood interventions do work a lot. Now, how do we measure success of our children in care protection system? We count how many children are in the system, institutionalized, how do they leave, how do they succeed in school, how many do not go to any kind of prison or whatever. Why don't we measure the preventive aspect of it? Why don't we measure how many children stay in the families when they get the first report of the early warning system? In Spain, we measured the number of children that got the first report saying there is a problem in this family. It's not yet big, but there is a problem in the family. And 2 years later, after this report, 82% of the children are still in the same situation or worse. 82%.
Yes, Armel, you want to say something
it
about
didn't
that
work.
as well? Yes.
We didn't do the work.
Yes, I completely support this point. And what I wanted to say is that very often, due to the lack of knowledge of connections between people, they do reinvent the wheel, as we were saying, which is a waste of time, a waste of resources in general. And it's super important when you start, and that's to me the beauty of transnational cooperation and cooperation in general, is to go and look if other people, other organizations, other territories might have faced the same problem and have found something that you could use. Maybe not the whole solution, maybe just one element of it. I was super interested by this. You've got core ingredients that are not negotiable, but you've got a whole part that you need to adapt. No copy-paste, okay. But that's really important. And also to assess if what you're doing is innovative. Maybe often people are very scared because we're talking about innovation and they feel, oh, I'm not innovative, that's too big for me. Yes, it is. What is established, well established in a country, in an organization, might be totally new for you. And then it's an innovation where you are at that moment.
Yeah.
Yes.
And if I can just continue with one point, just changing the indicator changes the whole system. So the moment you look into how do we prevent children from getting into care because we strengthen the family, when you start measuring that, then suddenly many things become possible because you understand what kinds of interventions you start counting what really measures, what really changes.
With changing the indicator, you mean measuring in a different way or measuring other things,
exactly.
right?
If people say, but how do we change the system? And if the most powerful way to change a system is to change its purpose. And the purpose must be prevention. If the purpose is prevention and you change it because the indicator is how many families are able to keep their child, then suddenly you measure different things, you focus attention on different things, the NGOs, the money goes in different directions. That's how you change a system with a small change of changing an indicator. This happened in Colombia when we were talking about employment of women getting out of the FARC, terrorist things or armed group. So everyone was focused on employability. How do we make these women employable? And that was the wrong approach. How do we make them keep a job? Not even get a job, keep a job after 6 months. And then suddenly we discovered that there was a funnel. No? So many actually went to courses, but very few finished. So that was a big step. But then when they got a job, they didn't retain it after 3 months. So that was the big loss. And the system was totally blind of seeing that. So all these mental models that exist in a system change the moment you start putting the indicator in the right place. And perhaps the second element that was mentioned here is about the perfect solution. In the search of a perfect solution that works for 100% of the population is a futile effort. There's no need for something to work 100%. If it works for 70% of the population, and it's scalable and it works, then it allows you to focus on the 30% that is extremely difficult with the traditional intensive, job-intensive, people-intensive kind of interventions. This is completely fine because you free resources from the 70% on a scalable solution that perhaps is more effective. So this search for perfect solutions is really an obstacle for scaling innovations, no?
Interesting. Yes. shall we go to the second question? And second question then would be, what are the common barriers that hinder the adoption and implementation of social innovations in your community of practice? And why do these barriers persist? And how can we effectively address and overcome them? Agota, can I ask you to answer this question first?
Yes, I'm afraid it will be a long list, so I'll just give you one item, which may or may not be the most important. I think it's probably one of the most important ones, which is what I call the institutional barriers, which is closely linked to, I think, what Mikael has been telling us. So, because in some ways, institutions embody the mental mindsets of, or mental models of the past. And they're there to make sure that the services we provide are standardized and reliable and evenly distributed to whoever needs them. But at the same time, they make us fixed to problems of the past, because the mindsets were, or the responses or the right services were created for problems in the past. And when problems change and we get stuck with the institutions of the past, we are in trouble. And so basically, in some ways, the more solid, the more reliable the institutions, the more resistant they are to change.
Yes. And can we work around this in some way? Did you find solutions for that problem?
Oh, sure. I have all of them.
But you have a suggestion, don't you?
I do. So, well, obviously, one thing to do, one thing you can do is to work from the top down and give more autonomy to your institutions, kind of lighten them up and loosen the standards. And in some countries, this is actually happening in public employment services, that the local units get more autonomy and they're less bound by laws in how they do things. There are still requirements in terms of what services they need to provide and what their ultimate goals are. And they're measured and monitored for observing or working towards those goals, but they have more autonomy in how they approach the solutions. And that's one solution, but that's, I think, for many countries difficult, because the broader governance structures that they're working in do not allow, or do not make it easy for them to allow for more autonomy. The other solution, or one other solution, could be, which is what we worked on yesterday, actually, in our CoP, in our workshop, is to engage NGOs and cooperate with NGOs and basically let them do the innovative stuff, which the public institutions are not easy or find more difficult to do. This is not an easy solution either, so actually the same barriers are there, so the rigidities of public institutions make it difficult for them to engage NGOs, but it could be a first step in many situations. And we will work on this in our CoP, so watch out for our website and our outputs, because we will come up with more, the nitty-gritty of how to do
you have any experience with that in other CoPs, working more with NGOs? Luc?
Yes, we try to build our activities on well-established, well-structured stakeholder cooperation. And that means, of course, you have to involve the authorities, local authorities, national authorities. You have to involve those that deliver certain packages of services, and you have to involve the people themselves. That's a minimum requirement, I think, if you want to develop answers to today's societal challenges. You have to involve the entire network around the issues, and then you start the co-creation process. We discussed that yesterday as well. And in reply to what you said, to achieve this system change, we all know that in our machineries, there is a lot of money available. So what I think is what ESF and ESF Plus maybe more should do in the future is build in also rerouting the money from one approach to another. We all know that in our countries, innovative approaches are developed through ESF funding. They are developed, but they are next to the mainstream machinery.
Uh-huh.
And I think that it is very important that we, in the future, it's done already, but in the future, maybe even more, work on bringing the innovation into the mainstream funding system and reroute the money. Like direct payments is a model of rerouting the money from institutional to a more person-centered approach. And when you reroute the money, people tend to follow the money. I don't know why, but they tend to follow the money.
Make things happen. Angela, for material support, what are the barriers that you encounter and how do you try to solve them?
Yes, so also in our COP we have a long list of challenges, and we have addressed in a couple of meetings, especially the challenges of the transition from the previous programming program and the current programming programs from the FAIR to the ESF Plus. So let's say that the main challenges that we see is a lack of resources, of funding, but also human resources, funding, because maybe funding is available, but it's not ready, or also the fact that inflation is also deeply impacting so the use of funds. And in terms of lack of human resources, because especially in our COP, most of the implementation of the activities is done by NGOs, by no-profit organizations, which are mainly run by volunteers. And so sometimes, well, volunteers are doing really a great job, but at the sometimes they are also, of course, there could be a lack of human resources. And other challenges that we see is that, especially when there is a change of implementation, and as I said, we are moving, let's say that from a food distribution system to a food distribution system, but also with the possibility to use other options like vouchers. So when there is this kind of change of implementation, as it was said also before, there is always a kind of a resistance to change, so this is a challenge that we are currently facing. And also another challenge that was highlighted also yesterday during our COP is also the lack of dialogue or communication between the different stakeholders, so that's that there's really a wish, a desire to have more dialogue and discussion from the top to the bottom, and also from the bottom to the top level, at European level, national level, with public authorities, with other stakeholders, with NGOs. So this is there is still this challenge, or the feeling that the dialogue and the communication is not enough.
Not strong enough yet. Working on it.
Yes.
Yes, Erika?
I think some obvious answers would be bureaucracy, funding, political alignment, no long-term vision. But when it comes to migrant integration, I just want to speak on more intrinsic, because the reality is that a lot of people dealing with migrant integration, even though before I said there is a positive trend of being more inclusive, is still us speaking about them. So looking at it from that way, I think we still need to recognize certain issues that we are going to bring along ourselves into this. I think one of the things that was mentioned quite often, even coming, for example, from a government where usually you're very front end and you have to show that you're doing well all the time, is to actually accept the willingness to fail. And to give the space also for failure, to use it as a learning curve as much as possible. I think this is extremely important, and to understand that very few, I think, as you were also saying, there are very few things that can reach full potential, 100% success. I don't know of any. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't start working on them anyways. Yes. I think this is important. I think we need to also check the purpose of why we are in this line of work too. And ultimately our ego. What is our purpose? What are we doing? Are we willing to change our mindsets? I think this is really important. Are we willing to hear different voices? Are we willing not to give space? Because again, that is a bit, condescending. But to really understand that there are different ways of viewing things. And in fact, there was recently in a conference, I liked it, there was a youth activist who said, you don't need to give us youth a voice. We have a voice. You just need to sit down and listen to us. And I think this is true, you know, because very often it's about like, okay, we'll give you the space. Well, no, I mean, we don't need to do this. So I think this is important. Then I think there's also what was mentioned before is trust. You have to trust the process. It's slow. Social change is not going to happen from one day to another. It is slow, so you do have to trust the process. At the same time, but be adaptable, because especially in terms of migration, things change drastically. So you need to be ready to change. I think also this is especially from policymakers, not to get comfortable in the seat that we have, to be open, to be curious, to learn in every conversation, find different ways. And it is ultimately our responsibility to understand what is happening outside of our direct reality. I don't think it is other people's responsibility to come to us and say, telling us their stories and this, and, oh, sorry to hear. You know, it's us who should be taking on a bit more of an approach. Probably this I shouldn't say is maybe as here as this role, I can say it as government, I cannot say it, but be a bit rebellious. Like I think
Be
this
able
is
to?
a bit resilient and rebellious. You know, sometimes it's easier to apologize than ask for permission. So if need be, do it, then make up for it. But if you ask for permission, you wait for everything to be perfect to do it, probably you're not going to do it.
Yes.
Yes,
Okay.
exactly.
That's a nice thought. Look, if I'm not mistaken, in the community of practice of social inclusion, there was an online event a few days ago.
Yep.
Where you discussed all kinds of barriers. Can you enlighten us a bit on what were the findings or conclusions there?
Well, yes, of course, it was a very interesting event, and we had many speakers from all corners of Europe, and they all brought up different types of barriers from their perspectives. Managing authorities, people from the ministry, people from cabinets, also social service providers, people themselves, persons with disabilities, families living in poverty. And it was very interesting to see that dynamic and to see that at the end of the event, there was a sort of a consensus that actually all these barriers should not stop us from trying to do the right thing. And then I agree fully with what you said. Quite often, the worst enemy of the good is the best. If you try to solve everything, you solve nothing. If you wait until you have all the answers, then you will never embark on what you have to do. And then I would like to go back to what yesterday I talked about my Irish friend. Well, I would like to quote him again. He said, when it is about social issues, there are three very important elements that we should keep in mind. Attitude, attitude, and attitude. It is how you look at things and whether you are able to leave the box in which you live and think and start developing new approaches, new thinking with new partners to solve the problems. The report about our barriers discussion will be available very soon now. We talked about political barriers. We all know that. Different political levels have different objectives, and that is quite often conflicting, and that makes it difficult. Quite often it is the elephant in the room, but it is the reality. The local level might want something completely different from what Europe wants and from what the national level wants. There are the financial barriers, of course. It is not always easy to work in partnerships, so there are issues there as well, how to find the right partners. Legal barriers, our legal systems not adapted to the problems we try to solve. And then maybe the most important type of barriers is attitudinal. So it was discussed, it was a very interesting debate, and hopefully we will be able to publish the report very soon on the web page we have. And maybe to conclude on all these barriers, we ended with a sort of a conclusion. Quite often we invest too much, and that goes back to material support. We invest too much in managing the issues instead of in solving them. We try to manage poverty instead of trying to end poverty. We try to manage institutional living instead of allowing people to live in the community. We should maybe reroute our thinking also a bit there. Not manage social issues, but try to solve them.
Okay. And my conclusion is that on the next panel we have to invite your Irish friend, huh?
Oh, yeah. He's an
That's for
excellent speaker, I must say.
For sure. Okay. Armelle Ledan for the COP on social innovation, which is of course the most broad competencies, let's say. I remember that during our first meeting you highlighted that it's difficult to connect and bridge the successful social innovations with policy level also. Can you well elaborate a little bit on that maybe?
Yeah. I'd love to be controversial because it's much more fun, but I just agree with all my colleagues, so I won't be.
It's a real problem, huh?
It's a problem. I think it's going to be easy to work together. No, I mean, the list could be long as well. I mean, the risk aversion, the problem of funding, but basically it ends up very often to the conclusion that what is missing is the involvement of the right level at the right moment of the policymakers, the guy who've got the control, the power, the money, the capacity to adopt a reform, change the law, change the system. And you can arrive and you can have the best solution if you can't convince them.
Mm-hmm.
And it's incredible the number of people that I heard saying, I don't have the right connection. I don't know how to reach these people. They don't have the time. They don't even know me. And so to me, that's really a big challenge. And there's one thing that I believe is just try. We are also innovating and experimenting. Just don't be afraid. Try with all the connections that you have. You can also contact now the national competence centers, but don't be afraid to go look at the policy agenda that they have. Look if there is something going on. Try to find allies and support because you need them on board. And they don't have the time to read 50 pages reports. So you have to be brief and to the point. And I don't know why, when we are in social science, we always find it difficult, and it is, to give evidence to prove. When you're in the tech innovation, you measure, you've got figures, data. We do have data. We do have figures. It's complex. I'm not saying it's not. Don't build big machineries with loads of indicators that say nothing. Focus on how to be simple, as you were saying. The couple of ones that are meaningful. What you're trying to achieve is a positive change for the people you're trying to support. So ask them what is going to make a change in their life. But demonstrate, prove if you want them to be on board. Yesterday I heard someone, I will not name anyone nor country, but she was saying, I'm in the government, and as long as I can't talk about concrete projects and give examples, they don't listen to me. They don't listen to me. So we have to be simple, demonstrate, give evidence, be to the point, prove it's also something that needs time. And that's a big problem because we don't have the same time than policymakers. They want fast results.
Yes, and I suppose it also depends on ideology then. Who's in the government speaking about prevention, for instance? I always have the impression, but I'm not a specialist, that it depends really on the ideology of the governing parties, if they're interested in prevention, yes or no.
If I just can add something, because I was evaluating a social experimentation in Italy, and it was about migration. The demand was from the policy, so everything was perfect. They wanted to test it on one region before adopting a reform at national level. What happened is that they had elections. The project was great, counterfactual evaluation with data, everything was super, change of policy. So one result of this evaluation, and we talked with all the projects, they said policymakers, those who are elected, they change, find allies in the administration because they remain there, they're stable.
Yeah.
And it's cheap, but it's valid.
Agota.
Yeah, and also talk to the media.
And
I just remember the example, I don't know how many of you remember, but when Sure Start was started with, by New Labour in Britain, and it was when the Conservatives overtook power, and it was on the verge of being closed down. but it was so widely accepted and known by both the media, the public, and the wives of conservative politicians that they convinced them to keep the program, and it continued.
Interesting.
And I think it's interesting, this idea of how the politician actually creates a debate, and this what you were saying about ideology, and when we have the far right basically simplifying the debate to the most simple and simplistic approaches, and we get into the moment where we want depth and analysis and so on. And the idea that a politician can actually embrace complexity and say, look, this is very complex, the debate, and engage the public in the difficulty of finding a balanced response to the complexity of a problem and saying, we don't know the solution yet. If this expression would actually empower so much your constituency, your citizen, in understanding that we are in the search. I don't know the solution yet, but I have a plan to find out what works and what doesn't. If we give this language to the politicians on the complexities of the problem, and then we do a second step, which is radical transparency, which is an amazing enabler for innovation, for engaging your citizens and your organization, private sector, NGOs, I don't care who, but radical transparency, putting the problem in front of the public, and saying, we need to find collectively a solution for this. I'm going to put all my muscle into this to try and find it.
And if there, in the cases where there's no 100% transparency from the side of social innovation promoters, is that because there's a lack of tool for it, or there's a reluctancy to be open?
There is a reluctancy to be open.
And why?
There's a reluctancy to be open because judgment is made on the basis, analysis and evaluation is not made on the basis of the knowledge you create and the search for a valid solution, but it is just show me results. Short term, I want the medal, and the medal, there's an amazing medal on I don't know the solution yet, but I have a plan. That's an amazing medal, but we don't make it important. And the amazing medal is to make the public more intelligent, saying, look, the debate is not if you are white or black. It's, we need to find the balance. So getting the grays in the room is what politicians have been trying to avoid for years now. And we're falling into this trap.
Thoughts from you?
I wish to meet a politician like that. I will move country immediately and work for them. I think it's a great idea. I think it's very difficult. But as we said, we trust the process. Hopefully we will get there. At a point that you said, I've been under 5 different administrations. I'm still around. I'm still doing my work. And so I do think it is important to not underestimate the work of low-level people too. Because we always sometimes focus very high up, but we don't always need to. I think with the media, it's a bit of a complicated issue. Sometimes the more you flag what you are doing, the more resistance you are going to get. So sometimes it's good just to go underground and get your work still done. And you're still going on. And the same thing even for political support. Even without political support, you can still keep on working. You still find your ways. Because I feel like sometimes we rely, obviously I understand the need for it, and it will drive things forward a lot. But it doesn't mean that if you don't have your full political support, you cannot do the work. I think this is important, to create a really good, strong base that you can continue no matter in which direction then they are taking you politically. Especially, in migrant integration, it's so politicized. Like everyone speaks about, as if they understand. Everyone outside speaks about migration as if they, I don't know, like football, you don't really, most of people don't really understand the full things they are saying, but it's just a discourse, a natural discourse. So we should go ahead with our work.
Okay, last question for you. We heard a few examples, but we're digging a little bit deeper for more examples because we want to be as concrete as possible. Also, I think it's very interesting also for everyone here. So the last question would be, can you provide some examples of successful strategies or initiatives that have effectively tackled barriers to social innovation in different communities of practice or thematic areas? And look for social inclusion. You said you would be able to share a few very concrete examples with us.
Yeah, I think so. And I would like to connect that to what you said with regard to how can we create in society a sort of acceptance of the fact that we try to come with solutions. It is a bit about in your brilliant presentation, thank you very much, the small boats that change the course of the big boat. So the question is, what are game-changing interventions? How can you, by, in a way, provoking a small change, having as an effect that the entire machinery starts to change? And that is so to have a sort of a snowball effect. By the way, you scared me. Can I make a little joke? you said that maths is easy. And I saw half of the room saying, yes, it is easy. And the other half of the room, me included, said, ooh, I must be really dumb because I don't think that. By the way, just a joke. It is about finding game-changing interventions. And allow me to tell you a little story. Yesterday I talked about Jeffke. Today I want to talk about Elise. Elise.
Also from your village, or
no, not from my village. No, not from my village. But many years ago, I was director of a small daycare center for very severely disabled children. Children without speech, that cannot walk, that cannot feed themselves. So really very severely disabled children. And Elise was one of them. Wonderful child. We established communication with her without speech. Wonderful kid. At a certain point in time, her mom comes to me and says, look, sorry, we cannot keep Elise in the daycare center. We have to bring her to an institution because it takes too much time to feed her. And the mother was explaining, for every meal, she needed an hour and a half to feed the child due to problems of swallowing. Those that work with that target group, they understand what I try to say. So very slow eating. So she was almost 3-4 hours a day feeding her child. And she said, sorry, that's not bearable anymore. The other kids complain. My partner, we tried to divide. It's impossible. So she has to go to an institution. I said, sorry, please wait. And I organized a team meeting with the psychologists, speech therapists, care workers, social workers. We organized a meeting and we decided, instead of asking the mother and the father to feed the child, we sent in a well-trained speech therapist that understands the swallowing and will then, and we sent in that very expensive speech therapist 3 times a day to that family. 3 weeks later, the mother comes to me and says, look, sorry, please stop that. You have broken the relation with my child. Because that moment of feeding was, for me, a real, very emotional connection with that child. And you have taken that away. Please stop that. And I thought, something is going completely wrong here. And I asked whether I could come to them in the family and have dinner together. And they invited me, and we had dinner together. And we talked about things. And the final conclusion was, much cheaper and really helping them, instead of sending in an expensive speech therapist, we sent somebody in to do the cleaning and the cooking for the family. Much cheaper, more effective, and we did not break the relation anymore in the family. And that was only possible thanks to this little ship, game-changing thinking. We don't have to talk with only the professionals around the table about an issue that we maybe do not completely understand. We have to talk with the people themselves.
Yeah.
And then you find the real, it's a bit connecting to what you said. Then we understand the real issues, then we understand the real questions, and then we will come with innovative solutions, quite often much cheaper than what we professionals.
Very beautiful
Just an example.
Yes.
Elise.
One thing I wanted to ask you as well is something that you mentioned when we had the preparatory meeting. An example from the Netherlands. You told us that in the Netherlands they have a special set of rules that allows to put hindering legislation on hold during a phase of innovation. What did they do with that? Do you know an example they use it for?
I hope that there are colleagues from the Netherlands here and that they can maybe take the floor later on to explain it a bit more. I tried to find more background of it, but I didn't manage. But it is indeed a system that exists that for certain types of innovation, in the disability field, in the field where I worked in, they could, in a way, put hindering legislation on hold. Like one example, when you do community-based housing facilities, small scale, you have to do that in line with the HACCP rules, hygiene rules. There is not one apartment in Brussels or in Amsterdam that is fully in line with the HACCP hygiene rules for industrial kitchens and so on. They can set that aside, these hygiene rules, and still allow people to live on their own and to have their own small kitchen so that they can build up their own life.
Is there someone from the Netherlands here who knows a little bit more about this?
Yeah.
Over there? Can we bring a microphone there? Would you be prepared to explain
We
this in 1 or 2
we
minutes?
used it in the disability field some 10 years ago, and I think that it was an ICF, European Social Fund project.
I'm from the Netherlands, but it's the first time I hear it. Sorry. So,
Oh, okay.
but
So take it with you then.
I will investigate. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Okay. So far. Agota.
These are called, they are called sandboxes. So the technical term is sandbox.
Yep.
So in a sandbox, which is a safe environment for experimentation, it happens.
A closed environment separately from
exactly.
reality.
Well, no, it's reality.
yes, but I mean separate from the legislation that
It's an exception that allows you to test a new approach to one thing that without the limitations of a very heavy instrument, I mean, a very heavy regulation of how this should be done, so that you can experiment. With financial instruments, it's full of examples.
Okay.
In our sector, it's full of tries, of experiments that have never really managed to deliver anything.
But we work with people, huh?
I hope, yeah.
You can experiment with a smartphone or with something technological.
The fear
but
for
with
failure.
people, we have to be careful, huh?
Yeah, but financial, the banks, they don't work with people, but they do work with people.
Agota,
I agree. Yeah.
you wanted to share with us an example about flexible financing forms that can make more room for social innovation. Please.
Yes, and I can thank you for the example of Elisa, because it gives me a good example to illustrate what I mean. Because in the case that you mentioned, obviously you had flexible funding, which allowed you to switch or to transfer.
We bended the rules a little bit, I must confess.
So you used Erica's approach as well, but you combined Erica's approach. But so the point in flexible financing is that rather than financing the inputs, when you say how many people you can provide this and that service and how you're supposed to provide it, or whether you would need to, or whether you have money to pay for the speech therapist or for the cleaners, you just get a lump sum, a block grant, and you use it as best as you can for the benefit of the client. And obviously there's a catch there, because we have invented input financing because it gives us some safeguards for preventing fraud and misuse of the funds. So we can't just let it all go. We need some other safeguards, and there I can link to what Mika just told us about the use of transparency. I think transparency can be one of these safeguards. So let me give you 2 examples maybe. One is, again, from the Netherlands, where they started to use these lump sum or block grant types of funding for social services. And to make sure that municipalities do not misuse the funds or do not save on the poor, they obviously have new monitoring instruments to make sure that the outcomes are there or the results are tangible. And I assume, I don't know, again, if there's somebody from the Netherlands who knows the details, feel free to contribute. But so typically in such systems, when you have a block grant, you need to measure the outcomes, and you need to keep monitoring what's going on. But what you don't do is you don't tie the hands of the service providers in how they do things and what they spend the money on. And the other example, so this is about how to use it in public agencies, and the other example concerns NGOs. It comes from Hungary. And the method there was that the donor set up, the donor provided very flexible and also fairly long-term sustainable funding, which is, again, important not only to give space to innovation, but also to sustain it. And the donor decided to set up a peer network among the NGOs who were receiving the money. The project was about segregated settlements, what to do with people who, I think it was mainly Roma communities in remote areas of Hungary, and how to make sure that they are reintegrated and go back to the labor market, etc. And the NGOs who got funding to work in different areas of the country were called together to set up some sort of, you could call it an internal pressure group, really. So they were asked to report to each other whatever they were doing very systematically, quarterly, I think, so 4 times a year at least. And this new institution created 2 things at least. So first, it obviously provided inspiration that they could learn from each other's mistakes, etc. But at the same time, it created a new level of transparency, because they were between themselves. Everybody knew what the other one was talking about, so you couldn't hide if you were misusing the money. It was clear for everyone, and also there was professional pride as a way to ensure that everybody was using the money to the purpose that it was designed to serve.
Thank you. Armel, you wanted to share with us an example from Portugal or Germany? If I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, because when we were talking about the general support of the whole ecosystem, some countries are trying to adopt policies at national level that really focus on social innovation. And so it's a bit soon to say that it's working very well, super well. Some things can be adjusted. In the case of Germany, it's been adopted 1 month ago, and it's a joint collaboration between 2 ministries, which is something noticeable. In the case of Portugal, Portugal is a pioneer with regards to social innovation, and they started this policy in 2014. I'm looking at Vera to be sure I'm not saying stupid things. And they really adopted a transversal approach, which means that, to be blank, the Social Innovation COP, for instance, would not really exist, but we would be there in all of your COPs. They're supporting social innovation everywhere, but they created specific and very powerful ways of funding social innovation, because very often it's not adapted due to the risk, due to the long-term results that needs times, etc. They experimented themselves loads of things, and what is interesting is that they regularly review what they did to adjust and modify, and they started actually to share that knowledge with many countries in these transnational networks. And the other one that everybody mentioned is ALMA. ALMA is the typical example of an initiative that was a successful innovation in Germany and that now is shared everywhere. Territoire Zéro Chômeur, which is something in the north of France, which is expanding a lot in France, social experimentation, very small, which is now crossing the border and being tested and adapted in Belgium, Wallonia.
Yeah. Now,
so there are loads.
Yes. And the good thing is that we'll find more and more examples in the SIM database, of course, in the Social Innovation Match database, which is good news for all of us, I think. Maybe Angela or Erika, I don't know if you want to share an example with us, if I may ask briefly, because I'd like to go to the questions from the audience.
Yes, so if I may, and I will be very, very quick, I would like to share an example that I heard yesterday. So in our COP, we focused on accompanying measures. So, well, of course, we spoke about material support, but now with the FED and now with the ESF Plus, the ties between material support and accompanying measures, it's becoming more and more important, so that we are not providing only food, but we are also, it's a path towards the social inclusion of the end beneficiaries. And there was a very nice and I would say also simple example from Luxembourg, so that I will change a bit the country. So there are social supermarkets where people in need can go, they can do their grocery shopping, so they can receive products financed with the FAIRs, and now in the future will be with the ESF+. But in addition to this, there's also food which is donated by citizens, donated by companies, recovered from supermarkets so that it's saved from becoming food waste. And that these beneficiaries can also volunteer in this social supermarket so that they can learn a job, and then probably they can be also reintegrated in the system. So that it's, I think that it's a nice example of circular economy or a circular system. And just the last comment, coming back to what Luke was saying before, I think that it's a matter of managing the issue while we're trying to solve the issue, because we cannot forget that we still have to manage also the issue.
Of course.
One last comment from Erika or Mikael before we go to the...
I'll just add a quick example,
yes,
something that we
please.
worked on, so not biased at all. But basically, we had a forum which was led by migrants to discuss issues that need to be changed in terms of integration. And in the end, it ended up being very difficult to run, simply because they came to us. You expect our expert advice, you expect us to be present, but we're not being paid. Like anyone else, obviously, for the expertise, you pay them. And the simple thing that we did was, then we went through public procurement and we set up a system where then they were paid for their work. And this completely changed how everything was done. And then in turn from that, the conferences that were being held were completely led by this migrant community. The participation was involved, the narrative completely changed, the discussions, everything, as just from changing one, literally payment, something so simple, but changing that, all the results then changed completely from it.
That's interesting. Yeah.
Building on this, a headline, where I've seen, and building on what Agatha was saying on flexible funding, where I've seen the best elements of innovation is when we have outcomes-based contract. When the government basically says, this is the social outcome I want, this is the price I'm going to pay, and that's it. It doesn't say how you're going to do it. It doesn't say how much you're going to pay for everything. You have full flexibility on doing what is needed to achieve the outcome. When done well, when done with the legacy planned already from the very beginning, so I obviously want to know how you have spent the money. But I'm not going to tell you how to spend it at the beginning. I'm just going to validate it, that you have spent it in a proper way to get the outcomes. These kind of contracts, social outcomes contracts, have amazing opportunities. And we've seen many examples in many of the countries, Portugal, in the UK, France, etc.
Time for your questions. Again, you'll be able to write your question in Slido or just raise your hands to gain some additional insights. Vera was the quickest here.
Sorry.
No, that's okay.
It was really, really interesting. And thank you, Mikael, for the presentation before. Because I really enjoyed the image of the big ship and the small ones. And the way I look to the big ship is more like the system. So this is the big system. And as Luke said, what is needed is to bring the innovation to the mainstream, so to the big ship. Because the big ship is run by mainstream solutions and mainstream mechanisms. So my question to the CoPs, and perhaps even for Mikael, is how are you planning to bring this preventive approach to better design preventive indicators? So how are you planning to consider this preventive thinking as a way of driving the big ship forward? Because I think that's really the game changer. Once the big ship starts sailing based on preventive solutions and approaches, we might be getting there. Then on the other hand, and also perhaps to the CoPs, how are you planning, or perhaps are already working, with attitude towards exclusion? Because again, we keep talking about participatory models, bringing those to the table. Luke gave the example around employability, how to better prepare to be employed. But in fact, we also need to consider our attitude as society toward those who are not yet at the table. And that sometimes is the blockage. So especially, how are we working or helping authorities and the system to work with employment services, with social services? how are we helping them to also change their attitudes, because that indeed will change, and we will be the ones, the drivers of inclusion rather of exclusion. So I was really fond of the discussion, because indeed I think we have here the theory, but for example, and I'll conclude, how are the CoPs planning to embed this thinking within ESF? Because as Luke very well said, the majority is still within the big ship, the mainstream. How can the CoPs help public authorities to better define and design preventive indicators, and to involve also not the small ships, but the medium size, employers, social services?
All right. 2 questions, and not easy questions, if you ask me. So I don't know if you have an answer ready or have to think about it more, but I don't know who wants to say something.
Can I go first?
Yeah, of course.
3 things come to mind. One, and it was in a way conceptualized already a little bit by Miguel, maybe we should, in our CoPs, work on the sandboxes. That would be very interesting work, I think. How can we create sandboxes? So where we can, in a way, put existing legislation on hold and really do what we want to do. That would be very interesting, I think. Secondly...
But policy has to allow it.
Yeah, of course. But that is the advantage of ESF+.
Yeah.
In ESF, there is some room for experimentation. There is some room to think outside of the box. So let's maximize that room and use it.
Okay.
And we could do that also by trying to develop sandboxes in different areas. Secondly, there is a lot of data available. So maybe we should try to better use this data. If we use the existing data better, then also what we set up the outcomes will be better. We know that early childhood intervention works in a preventive way. So let's mainstream it. Let's use it also for the authorities. There is a possibility that you can reduce the non-effective spending, because there is a lot of spending of public money that is not giving the outcome we want. So let's try to look at that and go for the most effective interventions that we know already. And then a little promotional ad for our next activity. The CoP Social Inclusion will organize on the 6th of December an online event, and we will try to identify game-changing interventions. We will look at the little ships that can push the big boat a little bit. 6th of December, don't miss it. Thank you.
Agota.
Maybe just one quick idea that I think it's important for us to recognize that our CoPs are interrelated in this respect as well, in the sense that some of the indicators that are output indicators for you, or outcome indicators, are actually about prevention for us, for the employment CoP. So, for example, school dropout is an outcome indicator for public education, but it's an obvious indicator of proper prevention for us. So I think that's food for thought for us and for our future cooperation.
Okay, anyone else? Or can we, yes, Armel?
Just one thing, and it's a bit controversial, about the results linked to the outcomes. Yes, but there is a risk also, because in social experimentation and social innovation, we all agree there's a risk, and we are not sure we're going to achieve the outcomes that we're planning. So to me, it's more an obligation of means. You do everything you can to achieve the results that you plan, but you're not sure. It's an adventure. And when we made these evaluations, we asked, because it was very in the air at the time, and we were requested to ask the projects and the beneficiaries of the project if they would have gone for the project if it had been paid by results. The majority said no, because when we started, otherwise we can do that, but we're going to take the easy projects, the ones that are easy, or the easy target group, the less difficult in the disadvantaged groups.
And who will decide what the result is? What the good
Exactly,
result is?
exactly.
That's the political
So,
choice then.
Yeah, and that's where the negotiation and the decision about what is the outcome that you want to achieve is very, very important. And what I particularly liked in this presentation, and that is echoed here, is that the devil lies in the details. We all agree on the big statements and the general ones, but it's when you go really in depth, a bit like what you did, very stubborn person. It doesn't work. I propose a solution. It still doesn't work. Why? And I try again. And I go and I see myself and I try to reassess the situation. And I eventually find there is another alternative, which eventually is cheaper, but it's not the only issue. And I think that's the analysis and the assessment of the need with the beneficiaries. Social innovation is really user-centered. You can come with the best intention and the best program you have designed with super people. You might miss the point because you didn't ask these people if this is really their needs.
Yeah.
And sometimes they think the need is to have a help to feed the child, and in fact it's not that. So you need to discuss and exchange and go in depth, until you really find, okay, I think, and we are all very modest when we experiment, I think this is the problem and let's try together.
Shall we take a question from Slido, maybe?
Can I react to the
Yes.
provocation
Yes.
here?
Yeah.
Now that we have a bit of, because she said a very interesting thing.
Mm-hmm.
Social outcomes contracts are not based on real experiments because the risk assessment is very low. So you want low risk projects in order to make sure that it is successful, right? So no one wants to invest in high risk. And this is related particularly to this social impact bond or social impact contracts that exist. And the problem here is that we don't want to get engaged into projects that are high risk because the investors have a cap on the returns. So the guys that anticipate the money say, okay, I'm not going to invest a lot in this very risky project because the potential return on investment is capped because the people would not accept a return of 15% per year of my investment. Now, if there is a lot of risk and return needs to be parallel. So there is a solution for this. And it's true that many social outcome contracts have been designed to get basically investors a bit richer than what they were, no?
Ouais.
But getting back to the question, and I think you mentioned it, there is no shortcut for analysis, for investing in analysis and design. Many people criticize projects, social outcomes projects, because they spend a lot of money in digging deep into the issue and documenting it and getting the data before implementation. Now, my point is that it's much more expensive to spend a lot of money on executing a very poorly designed project, which is 90% of the projects that I have seen. So expensive is a subjective matter. And I think it's very important to invest in design and analysis, because you will get then all the prevention. It comes automatically the moment you start digging deep into the problem.
Okay.
Can I, very brief?
Very briefly.
Very brief.
I want to go to other questions as well.
I agree, we invest not enough at the very start by digging in, but we also tend to invest not enough at the last phase, the implementation. We think, oh, we have the ideas, here, do. Then the real work starts, then the hard work starts, because then you have to change, you have to retrain people, you have to re-equip systems, and so and so. So both at the start and at the end of the innovation process, we have to invest more.
I'm picking the first question, the most popular one there. How do we convince governments to validate social outcome-based funding? Also about financing and funding. Michael?
For me, the question is, how do we convince governments to get engaged into risky experiments that have, in areas where we are failing systematically and dramatically? So we are failing systematically at the children and the families age 0 to 6 in preventing them to get into care. So before getting into making a policy, let's make an experiment, validate a number of hypotheses that are very well defined from the very beginning. So if you dig deep into the issue, the hypotheses that you need to validate in an experiment are relatively easy to understand. So, and you just need to validate 2, 3 key hypotheses that if you work with families where there is no child abuse from the father, particularly, in the case, it is worth exploring, investing in the family with a young child, and let's validate a couple of things of the intervention, and then you get it. And then you do your policy, which is finally evidence-based. So the experiment is done on the basis of how do you validate a number of hypotheses that would allow you to do this ideology-based solution that you have in your head, but now it's evidence-based too. So I would go with this sort of argument.
Thank you, Michael. Maybe another question from the room. Someone who we haven't heard yet. You've asked a question yesterday. Sorry, I'm going to go for the people who we haven't heard yet. Or yes, go ahead. Oh, okay. In the back, there.
It's all dark. We can't see people.
Hi there, Mark Majewski Anderson from Glasgow Caledonian University. I think a lot of people have talked about, in the last couple of days, about the second half of the spiral, the systemic change. And I think that when kind of people talk about social innovation, they tend, the kind of practical side seems to be the first half of the circle, and the second half of the circle seems to be a lot more challenging and radical. And I wanted to ask, as kind of people who are perhaps part of the system, whether they see that the ultimate goal of systemic change may be putting themselves out of a job, and whether there is real benefit in pursuing this systemic change, or whether this kind of incremental, kind of micro-level social innovation is actually effective enough.
Who wants to take this question?
It is a very difficult one.
Yeah.
But I don't buy the question of putting people out of the job, because the job is going to be transformed. Our jobs have changed in the last 5 years for sure, a number of times, and they still will. So what I see, and I think the example of Glasgow is very good. When we study systems change, there is an example of Glasgow and how Glasgow tackled the issue of homicide or homicides, of killings, a number of murders that existed in the city, and there was an amazing transformation when the chief of police basically changed the purpose of the system, not in putting more police on the street to prevent crime, but actually to understand that it was a pathology of a number of people in certain regions that behaved in a way they behave against society because of certain experiences they had in their lives. So the preventive approach of saying, no, we need to put more police on the street, or let's start tackling the social pathology that exists behind this number of murders that exist in the city, is an amazing system change approach whereby you change the purpose of the system and suddenly our roles change. So we are all part of the system. It's just that we need to start thinking that if we design the mental models in a different way, we understand what kind of structures generate more problem than solutions. And we explore with little boats certain new realities, validate certain hypotheses on a small scale at the beginning. Then certain changes at the system level are possible, and our jobs will get transformed. So I don't think that we have to be motivated by there is a solution, silver bullet solution that will end up everything with a system change. It's going to take years, but on the way we will reinvent ourselves to certainly look at those that are left behind in the new system that gets in place. So I know it's not a perfect answer, but it's...
I want to add if...
Yes?
Yeah, sorry.
Of course, I agree. Whether change is is needed. I don't think that that is the right question. We live in a world that is constantly changing and is changing faster and faster. Nobody of us communicates in the same way now as 10 years ago with your family, with your friends, with your colleagues. So everything is changing. So also the social machinery has to change. We cannot promote mobility anymore with steam engines. Steam engines, that's 100 years ago. Why is it so difficult to accept that we also have to change in the social environment and in the social machinery? What we should not do is blaming people in the machinery and making them, blaming them for the system they work in. We have to empower them so that they together with the people can change that. What we quite often, the mistake we quite often make is blaming people for working in a certain approach. I will never blame people that work in institutional care, because that's how the system is. But together with them, I want to work on how can we change the institutional care and make it more community-based. And that is the real challenge, I think. How can we bring in innovation, like we do in our all-day life? How can we bring that type of innovation also in the social system?
Armel and then Michael?
Well, a quick one, because I don't think we should oppose this. You know, you all know the spiral. Social innovation is a process. Of course, we all dream of changing the system. The system is changing anyway, that we are part of it, and sometimes not the way we want. But it's not a good excuse not to start at the beginning. And to me, there's no opposition between funding at micro level, very good and very useful initiatives and projects, and do the work in parallel to try to mainstream, embed them, try to have more people benefiting from the solution, and dreaming about changing the system. And that happens sometimes between transformation and revolution, but don't oppose them. If you aim to the moon and you look at it and you don't move, it's a bit of a shame and it's a bit of a pity, because there's one thing that is sure. I was reading this morning that more than 600 homeless people died in my country, France, which is not a poor, underdeveloped country. And we have not the right not to try something. That's just what I think. We just need to act, full stop.
And the big question is, what is the alternative?
Well,
So if we don't work in system change, what is the alternative? And if the alternative is a patch, I mean, who wants to work in a Band-Aid when we really have a blood? The alternative is so poor, is so unengaging, is so marginal, and it's so sad. I accepted this 20 years ago, not anymore.
Okay, I want to take one more question maybe, because we're running out of time, unfortunately. How can we approach government to convince to reduce gold plating and allow the flexibilities provided under the ESF to flow down? It's a question I don't understand, but maybe
I think
maybe
as I'm an outsider.
We do understand.
Okay.
In this context.
Erika.
In this context, yeah.
Exactly, I'm trying to obviously take in for what I can also understand from it. I think a lot of it is also, especially when funding is, for example, going, in most cases now, a lot of it is EU funding in the end, what we are doing. So when a lot of funding is going through managing authorities, and there is the concept of the threat of audit and financial correction, and this fear, I believe that comes way over what we want to actually achieve from the projects. So I think it needs to be a trickle-down approach where, again, what we're saying before, it's okay to fail. It's okay to maybe not do something perfectly, especially, and to change too. So sometimes I feel like, obviously, it is easier to set clear standards and rules, and you make sure everyone applies to them, and you don't question, because like this, you don't need to think about different ways. So allow for a bit more flexibility, but also from the Commission, obviously, and then coming down.
Armel, you wanted to comment on that as well, or?
No, we were discussing I would be curious to know if everybody understood the question, because I'm not sure myself I understand the question well enough to answer. So that was just a
Does the person who wrote this question want to?
I think we have to make
Gold-
things
gold
less
plate-
simple and simple.
Gold
Not really,
plating.
not really.
I-
Yes,
i-
yes.
If I may, if I can give a concrete suggestion to this person, because I believe that I understood the question. Well, so I would suggest you to bring to your government some good examples from other EU member states. So how the other member states are implementing, and what's the level of flexibility that they are using at national level. Because if it's possible in one member state, why shouldn't it be possible in another one?
Yeah, but just to
That's
react to this-
transnational cooperation.
Yes,
I'll go to
I
that.
do.
Where the benefit is.
But also, I would also propose to make more concrete proposals or suggestions on how to, or what sort of safeguards can they use. So what they lose with the flexibility, how they can regain that, because they want control over how money is spent, and they want to make sure that the projects don't fail, because they're afraid of losing the funds, or to get into trouble with their relations with the EU. So if you can tell them how to introduce more transparency, and also that NGOs or implementing organizations to be more open to embracing tighter monitoring rules or more transparency about how they're doing things, I think that helps.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for your questions. I'm sorry we couldn't answer them all, but maybe it's an idea to ask your question in person to one of the panel members during lunch. They will stay here undoubtedly for a few hours more. So thank you, and thank you so much for taking part in this panel. Luc, Agota, Armel,
Angela.
help me, Angela. So sorry. Erika and Mikkel, thank you.